What's up, everybody? Matthew here. Thanks for checking into the channel. We're going to have some fun today. We're going to talk about what is the best Christian denomination. Now, I do need to qualify that it's going to be the best Christian denomination in my opinion. And of course, I'm going to invite you to share your opinion as we go through in the comments of this video. Feel free to chime in on every single one of these. But people ask me this question all the time. I think it's a fun question. So we're going to have some fun today. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings. I'm not trying to tell anybody they're better than the other person or anything like that. I'm just going to share my feelings of which denominations I think are reliable. People ask me all the time, if you weren't in the PCA, which I obviously am, I'm an ordained teaching elder or pastor in the Presbyterian Church in America, the PCA. If I wasn't in the PCA, or supposing the PCA didn't exist, which Christian denomination would I want to be a part of? Well, I've thought about that quite a bit. And honestly, there's a lot of good denominations out there. So again, my point here is not to smash on anybody, tell anybody who's better than the other person. I just want to evaluate some of the Christian denominations, and I'll tell you what my preferences are, even as you tell me what your preferences are in the comments of this video. Now, one commercial real quick here that I just wanted to mention. If you're interested in Presbyterianism, maybe that's why you're watching this video. You want to see how Presbyterianism stacks up against some of the other Christian denominations. I've written a book called Hold Fast the Faith. It's a devotional commentary on the Westminster Confession of Faith, which is our doctrinal standards underneath the scriptures. Obviously, we regard the scriptures to be inerrant, infallible, and authoritative, the inspired word of God. But the Westminster Confession of Faith is our subordinate standards by which we articulate our doctrine. So I want to post that here in a link in the description of this video. If you want to grab that, that would be great. But that being said, let me show you the setup here for this tournament. So I've been having fun doing these tournaments. I've did one before on Bible translations, another one recently on Reformed systematic theology. So the tournament format is fun. I used to be a wrestler, so I just kind of love this stuff. And what we're going to do is we're going to set out the PCA there sitting at final X, which is a wrestling term, meaning if you're the returning world guy and you've medaled, in the world or something like that, you have a chance to just bypass the tournament and go to the end. Everyone else has to compete in the US Open or the World Team Trials to get there. So since the World Team Trials happen to be this week in wrestling, I'm going to use that format. So the PCA is setting out there at Final X, waiting to take on any challenger. And so here's what we've got here. We've got Reformed Baptists at the top, which are not technically a denomination necessarily, but it's kind of an ethos or a collective of Reformed Baptistic churches. There's going to be a play-in, which they sometimes do in NCAA March Madness basketball. That's kind of fun, just to give some outsider a shot to get into the tournament, so we'll do that. We've got the CREC, or the Creek, that's Doug Wilson's group. We've got the RPCNA, the Wesleyan Church, non-denominationalism. Again, that's not a denomination by definition at all, but we're going to throw that in there just for fun. The United Church of Christ, the Christian Missionary Alliance, the Anglican Church, the PCUSA, not to be confused with the PCA, totally different there. Southern Baptist churches. Will kind of lump Pentecostal and Assemblies of God together for the sake of convenience there, just to get everyone in the bracket. United Methodist, Roman Catholic, Lutheran, Missouri Synod, and Eastern Orthodox. That's going to be our setup for this particular tournament. Again, the winner's going to advance all the way to take on the PCA, and we'll decide right now today if I am changing denominations. We're going to decide that right here in this tournament video. So let's set up our play-in. Now, these would be some denominations that didn't make it into the main bracket, but we're going to give them a chance to win themselves into the bracket. Sometimes they call that a pigtail in these kinds of tournaments. Here we've got the African Methodist Episcopal Church. We've got the Evangelical Free Church. We've got the Church of the Nazarene and the Friends or the Quakers going up against each other. Winner's going to make it into the main tournament here. So an African Methodist Episcopal versus the Evangelical Free Church. I'm going to go ahead and take the EV Free Church here. That's an interesting denomination, the EV Free Church is, because they're a Swedish denomination and they have some measure of freedom within their churches. Though they're an association, they form somewhat congregationally as it relates to some of their practices. And that means that there's a little bit of variance in the EV Free Church between baptism, mode, and things like that. It's a little bit looser there. They're non-creedal by their convictional heritage, but they do have something like a 12-point statement of confession of faith. The only problem with the EV Free Church, as far as I'm aware, is that it does lean towards premillennialism, and I'm an amillennialist. But that being said, It's going to beat out the African Methodist Episcopal Church, at least in my opinion. Unfortunately, I do associate that with something of leftist social politics, and I don't really have much interest in that. So no offense to anybody, but the EV Free Church is going to win that match. And then as it relates to the Church of the Nazarene versus the Friends or Quakers Church, these are two denominations that are really quite different from my tradition. Of course, as a Reformed Presbyterian, conservative, confessional, Westminster Confession of Faith, and so forth, both of these denominations are going to be quite different from me. I have rather positive feelings and experiences with both of these. I've known some really good Nazarene pastors. I really love the Lord. Strong holiness inclinations there, a real strong ethos and desire for the holy life. And the Friends and the Quakers, man, my goodness, back in the day in the colonial era, my people probably would have persecuted the Quakers and the Friends, honestly. But hey, I'll tell you what, I'm going to put them through. And the reason is because I went to Malone College, and it was a Friends or Quakers school. And believe it or not, they introduced me to Reformed theology. So even though doctrinally I would not want to be a Quaker or a Friends church person today, the Friends Church was kind to me. They scholarshiped me very well through my Bible and theological education. I met some good Reformed people there, some professors that were teaching Reformed theology. So it's just an emotional one on my part, just kind of a good, memories, good feel-good one for me. But again, if the question is really who would I want to switch denominations to between these two, the EV Free Church and the modern-day Quakers of the Friends, I'm probably going to put the EV Free Church through. And that means that the Evangelical Friends Church is going to make it through our pigtail round and into the main bracket. And let's go then to the first quadrant of our bracket. Here we've got Reformed Baptist churches, which again are congregational, so they're not technically a denomination. Though there is something like the GARB, the General Association of Reformed Baptist Churches, so maybe we could just assume that that's what we're talking about, though there's all sorts of independent Reformed Baptist churches going up against the EV Free Church that we just mentioned. And here's an interesting one. We got the Creek versus the RPCNA. We'll talk about those as we go. But if I had to choose and I'm looking for a church for my family, or maybe I'm going to switch denominations between Reformed Baptist and EV Free, I'm probably going to take Reformed Baptist. Now that may surprise you, but that's because I have so many good friends in Reformed Baptistic churches. And again, what's the scenario here? If I move to Wyoming and I'm looking for a few churches and there aren't many in my area and there's a Reformed Baptist church, I'm probably going to go to that church. I feel pretty good. Maybe they subscribe to the 1689 or one of the other Reformed Baptistic confessions of faith like Keith Foskey's church does in Jacksonville, Florida. Or, there's so many good, solid Reformed Baptistic churches. I probably would not have a qualm going there. The only thing I would really want to kick up a fuss about is I really wouldn't want them to try to negate our baptisms because we've been baptized, been pouring, or to negate the baptisms of my children. That would sort of hold me back from membership and probably would be, ultimately, that'd be a convictional problem for me. But hey, this is a theoretical tournament. So let's talk about the Creek versus the RPCNA. Now, the Creek has some interesting things to it, the CREC, Douglas Wilson's denomination, and of course there are a lot of firebrands in that denomination, and quite honestly that does hold me back from it just a little bit because I'm not a controversialist myself. I love the idea that the CREC has some bold articulators of Reformed doctrine, that there's some latitude as to which confessional system to subscribe to. In the CREC, you can subscribe fully to the Westminster Confession of Faith. I think there's some other options there as well. And despite the boldness and the brashness of some of their personalities, which does rub me the wrong way and kind of turn me off, I'm just not really into that sort of flamboyant firebrand type thing where you just post things just to get reactions. A lot of the CREC pastors seem to do that. It's kind of a young denomination. Lots of good solid people in there for sure. I wouldn't attack them any more than I'm doing right now, other than saying that my preference here would probably be for the RPCNA, and probably by a mile too, because I am an adjunct professor at RPTS, the Reformed Presbyterian Theological Seminary, which is the denominational seminary for the RPCNA. If you're not familiar, the RPCNA is a small Reformed denomination. Reformed Presbyterian comes from the Covenanter movement, and some of their hallmarks are exclusive psalm singing, mediatorial kingship of Christ, and in my view, unfortunately, they do have women deacons, which we're probably going to come back to later on in the tournament. But I'm going to put the RPCNA through for sure right now over the Creek. I love singing the Psalms. Anytime I go to the seminary and we have chapel and we get to sing the Psalms together, I'm thrilled with that. I could easily sing Psalms for the rest of my life, a cappella, no problem. So I could definitely do that. And I love the doctrine of the mediatorial kingship, which I've talked about in other videos. So that means for me, in this corner of the bracket, the RPCNA is going to make it out and into the semifinals of this particular tournament. So congratulations to the RPCNA group. You've made it through. By the way, they have the best logo of every single denomination that I'm going to mention today. I love the Crown and Covenanter banner as a denominational logo. I think that's boss. And so there's no question, out of all of these so far, the RPCNA is the top dog and possibly a leading contender to make it even further on in this tournament, as we shall see as the tournament goes on. Let's go to our next quadrant. We've got the Wesleyan Church. We've got non-denominationalism. Notice their bland, boring logo I chose for them because they're not a denomination, so there's no logo to be found. Uh-oh. We've got some progressives here, the United Church of Christ and the Christian Missionary Alliance, which is a much more solid and faithful denomination than the UCC. Whew. Well, I'll say something about the UCC in a minute. But first, Wesleyans versus non-denominationals. What do you think I'm going to do? What would you do? Well, I'm going to pick non-denominational. That's just because I'm not Wesleyan. As you probably know, Charles Wesley, great hymn writer. John Wesley, not my favorite theologian. Wesley is an Arminian, so that's going to grind against the gears of my Reformed dogmatics that are deep in my heart as a Presbyterian myself. Wesley, I kind of like the Methodist idea of itinerant pastors that go around and preach and start new churches and things like that. Matter of fact, there is a Wesleyan Everhard a couple generations ago who wrote the Everhard family book from a Christian perspective. It's the tale of our whole genealogy as a family. And he was a Wesleyan circuit riding Methodist pastor. So I do have some positive feelings about that. But again, the question is, for me, if I was going to change denominations, I'm not really non-denominational, but you got to pick in a tournament. So I'm going to pick non-denominational here just because what I would do is try to shape it. I would try, if I was the pastor of a non-denominational church, I would try to shape it as much as I could. And I would feel better about trying to shape a non-denominational church than trying to revert a Wesleyan church away from its own convictions. I don't really like it when pastors do that. They come to a church, maybe they're called to a church that doesn't share their doctrine, then they try to flip that thing over, get it to change denominations, twist it around, turn it inside out. I just don't think that'd be fair. So I'm going to put non-denominational here. I'd feel better about shaping and molding a church like that. CMA versus the UCC. This is a no-brainer for me. I mean, an absolute no-brainer. I think, and again, I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings here, but the United Church of Christ is one of the most progressive, secular, liberal denominations there is. I would not touch a UCC church with a 10-foot pole. I really wouldn't. I think that they're so far into the LGBTQ plus movement that their theology is almost indistinguishable from the Democratic political party, to be honest. I can't think of a single plank of doctrine or ideology in which the UCC would prophetically speak against the Democratic Party. They just seem to be bought and sold by leftist political action. They're called the United Church of Christ. All three of those words are good words. United, it's good to have fellowship. Church, it's the Church of Christ, right? Christ, he's the Savior. But you put that together into the UCC, and for some reason, the entire Congregationalist movement has moved so far away from any mooring of resemblance to historic Christianity. I just couldn't swallow the bile building up in my mouth and attend a church like that. I do, however, have much more positive experiences with the CMA, the Christian Missionary Alliance. In fact, though they're not technically Calvinistic, there is a place for Calvinists within the CMA, and there's been some good CMA pastors. Every time I talk to one, pretty good conversation, definite orientation towards biblical orthodoxy and fidelity. They're probably going to lean a little bit more broadly evangelical than I certainly would in a lot of areas. Probably eschatology would be one of them. Probably sacramentology would be another. Perhaps even some friction related to the doctrines of grace. But I do think that they have the gospel of Christ and that they're trying, striving, preaching the gospel, missions, Great Commission, etc. So if those are the two churches in my town, and I could attend or pastor one, it's obviously going to be a CMA church as far as I'm concerned. And because it's at least more organized than non-denominationalism, I'm going to put them through to the next round as well. I have some good experiences with the non-denominational church, the chapel, in my background, especially during the college years of my life. Really some good pastors, including Newt Larson, who is just a stud and a mensch and a great mentor for me. But because I don't believe that independence is biblical, I do think that some kind of connectionalism is more biblical. That's what I see in the book of Acts, for instance. I'm going to put the CMA through here and move them on to the semifinals. Let's take the next quadrant here, and we got a bunch of interesting denominations here, some big ones too, some powerful ones. We got the Anglican Church, which is global. Let's just say, for the sake of discussion, though, that it's the conservative ACNA group here in North America, not the liberal Episcopal Church, which again, like the UCC, I would not really want to deal with at all, versus the mainline Presbyterian Church. And then down in the next matchup, we've got Southern Baptist versus the Assemblies of God. Okay, so let's take the first one first. I'm going to go with Anglican, and that may surprise you because I'm Presbyterian, right? Why would you entirely switch traditions? Well, because again, much like the United Church of Christ, the Presbyterian Church USA is so far afield from biblical ethics and biblical morality. Do you know that there's no ordination standard as it relates to sexuality in the PCUSA? So you could have a gay partner, you could have multiple partners, you could cheat on your spouse, you could commit polygamy, and the denomination would not discipline you as a pastor. I find that so incredibly offensive. You know, in the Reformation, there were 3 marks of the true church: the preaching of the word, the right administration of the sacraments, and then the administration of church discipline. In the PCUSA, because it's leftist, political, progressive, and secular, does not have any standard whatsoever of church discipline, and for that reason, I could not be a part of it. Now, you know, I've got my friend Richard Redeemed Zoomer, who's doing the Reconquista movements. And as much as I admire the courage to stay and fight, if you don't have church discipline, you don't have the courts, you don't have a true church. If you can't discipline a minister, if it's theoretically impossible to discipline a minister for fornicating, for polygamy, for adultery, for homosexuality, if you can't discipline that, you do not have a true church according to the Reformation standard. And again, I would not advise anybody to attend a PCUSA church unless literally it was the only church in the area and your pastor was willing to fight unto the death, basically to try to do something to bring this church back to some sort of biblical standard. Okay, so it's ACNA for me. Now, in Southern Baptist versus Assemblies of God, this is a pretty easy matchup for me. I'm going to choose the Southern Baptist Church here. I like the Assemblies, and I'm proud of their zeal for missions and evangelism. Certainly, they have a vibrancy as it relates to their zeal for worship, but there's just too much looseness there in doctrine that I could not abide. The wildness of some of the prophecies, the extravagance of some of what they would claim to be miraculous sign gifts, I would not support that, and so I'd rather be a Southern Baptist. And if it was Southern Baptist versus Anglican, I'm going to go ahead and take Southern Baptist, and that's kind of a tougher one for me because I could envision some scenarios in which I could be ACNA or Anglican, especially as there is some permittance there for a Calvinist like me, and because they would allow for infant baptism, which I believe in. But I've had too many better experiences with Southern Baptist friends and good Southern Baptist churches that I'd probably rather align myself that way, though neither of these would functionally be the best for me, Matt Everhard. You could tell me in the comments what you think, but just, again, totally theoretical and just for fun, Southern Baptist wins it here. Okay, that brings us to our last quadrant. We've got the United Methodist Church versus Roman Catholicism, and then we've got Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod versus Eastern Orthodox. These are 2 pretty easy wins for me, and I'm just going to go ahead and put them both through. I would definitely rather be United Methodist than Roman Catholic, and I'd definitely rather be Lutheran Missouri Synod than Eastern Orthodox. And the reason why the Catholics and the Orthodox just do not win it for me is I cannot abide the Dark Ages medieval theology that both of these churches have. I am not a papist. I do not think of the papacy as being biblical. I do not ascribe to the Marian dogmas that developed through much medieval Dark Ages, kind of like anti-reasoning and anti-biblical reasoning. I don't think much of that. I do not at all aspire to use icons or iconography in my worship. The idea of indulgences or the complex sacramental system of the treasury of merits, for all of these reasons, both Catholicism, and Eastern Orthodox are obvious no-brainers for me. So that leads me to the United Methodist Church and the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And here, again, this is a pretty easy one for me too. I'd much rather be Lutheran Missouri Synod than a Methodist. The Methodists also, like the PCUSA and like the UCC, are so torn by politics and leftist politics in particular. That denomination is being rended in half right now in a major schism. We're going to have to see what happens to the conservatives and for the conservatives, but unfortunately the mainline denomination, like the PCUSA and others, is just in a really, really bad place right now. The Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, however, though I disagree with certain of their doctrines, such as baptismal regeneration and their consubstantiation doctrine of the Lord's Supper, I do have to respect a reformational church that at least sticks to its guns as to what it actually believes. And as much as I decry and cannot stand progressivism and secular creep in all these denominations, at least I could compliment the Lutheran Missouri Synod Church for holding to their actual Reformation era convictions. Now, unfortunately, I probably couldn't receive the Lord's Supper there, which is why I couldn't stay for long. But I definitely admire and respect Martin Luther and his heritage, even as it expresses itself here in an American Lutheran articulation. I once was Lutheran, and to be completely honest, I could imagine a bizarro world, kind of a multiverse, in which if my Lutheran church had actually held to its convictions — I was unfortunately in the ELCA, the liberal branch, the mainline branch of that — maybe I'd still be Lutheran. But because of their unbelievably baffling compromises on historic Christianity, I had to leave the ELCA and wound up in the PCA, where I am today. So anyway, Missouri Synod makes it through. And let's go ahead and review where we're at so far in this tournament. Again, the PCA, my current denomination, makes it to Final X. They're going to take on the winner of the tournament. But making it out into the quarterfinals, Reformed Baptist, RPCNA, non-denominationalism, CMA, Anglican Church, Southern Baptist, Methodist, and Missouri Synod Lutheran. And then making it to the semis, the RPCNA, the CMA, the Southern Baptist, and the Missouri Synod. So let's go on with the tournament then. We'll do our semifinals and we'll see where we're at. By the way, this would be a good time. Tell me, did I get the right four in the semi? Did I get any of the right four in your opinion? I'd love to hear your opinion too. So let's deal this out. We're going to deal with a true third and a true fourth, as well as a finalist and a champion. So as it relates the RPCNA versus the CMA, I got to go with my Presbyterian homeboys. Of course, I'm going to do that. I love the Covenanters. I love Covenanter history. You know, the Covenanters in Scotland were some of the boldest, bravest martyrs for the faith. I absolutely love their willingness to die and suffer for Christ. I love the doctrine of the mediatorial kingship, that they wanted Scotland to be a Reformed and Presbyterian nation. I love even their desire to sing the Psalms and to have a regulated principle of worship to govern their worship times together. So there's very little fault I can find in the RPCNA. They're an easy finalist here. And if it's Lutheran Missouri versus Southern Baptist, that's a tough one for me, because while, again, I do feel rather positively about both of those, they both have their problems. I'm going to put Southern Baptist through, and who knows whether I did the right thing or the wrong thing here. But true fourth place is going to probably be the CMA here, and that's going to mean that it's going to be Southern Baptist versus the RPCNA to try to get against the PCA in Final X. And in this case, the winner is, can you guess it before I do it? The RPCNA. Obviously, it's going to be the RPCNA. So much to commend here, including the seminary, RPTS. I do feel very favorably about what we're putting forward as far as Christian education goes. If you're considering going to seminary, I'm adjunct at RPTS, and I could never be full-time faculty because I'm in the PCA. But I do believe that this is the Ivy League school of seminaries. The RPTS seminary in Pittsburgh is the oldest conservative seminary in the United States. You heard me right. So there's older seminaries. Yale's older, Harvard's older, Princeton is older, but all of those have gone leftist. RPTS is the oldest conservative seminary in the United States, and I'm very proud to be part of the RPTS adjunct faculty. And if I was going to switch denominations, it would be into the RPCNA. This would be my second place denomination. However, in Final X, PCA is still going to win it. PCA, I'm happy where I'm at. That's the end of the deal. I'm not changing denominations. I do love the PCNA for now. Now let's just run the drill and talk about it. Why couldn't I, though? Why couldn't I be in the RPCNA? Well, I could, but I don't want to switch denominations because then I'd have to go through all the trials of Presbyterian exams and things like that again. I really don't want to have to do that. Plus, I'm not sure they would have me. I don't think that they would receive me at this point, even if I applied, because as much as I love psalmody and singing the Psalms, I'm not quite there yet as it relates to exclusive psalmody. And I might even be willing to say that singing the Psalms is the best. And I'll say that. Singing the Psalms is best. It's better than anything else. But I can't quite come to the position that I would say that singing hymns or praise songs is wrong. And so I don't think I would pass my presbytery trials and make it into the RPCNA. I would not have a problem with the mediatorial kingship, because I do believe that, like, Simonton's book on Messiah the Prince is probably the best treatment out there. So no problem there. The other problem cuts the other way, though. I don't like their view of the incorporation of women deacons. And this is a battle that we're fighting in the PCA, kind of. And in my opinion, it's not best practice to have female deacons. I think that male elders, deacons, and pastors is truly the best. And moreover, I really believe that the PCA is a strong, solid, and faithful biblical, conservative, confessional denomination. So it checks all the boxes for me. And that means basically I'm pretty happy in the PCA. And I'd invite you to come check out a PCA church too. Most of them are solid. Are there some that are a little skittish? Yeah. There's a couple West Coast and East Coast ones that I'd be like, I don't know about that one. But most PCA churches, you walk in, you're not going to find liberalism. You're not going to find progressive or secular leftists and Marxist. You're going to find a conservative, confessional, Bible-believing church. 99 times out of 100, PCA churches are going to be reliable. Maybe that's pie-in-the-sky optimism on my part, but hey, I love my denomination. I'm glad to be part of it. Okay, so what did I get right? What did I get wrong? I'd be glad to hear you critique me in the comments here. And also, don't forget, if you want to learn more about Presbyterianism, check out my book, Hold Fast the Faith, a devotional commentary on the Westminster Confession. That's all I've got for you today. Thank you so much for checking into this video. As always, I love you lots, and I'll talk to you later.